Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly cyber threat intelligence briefing. Today is August 14th, which is actually John Henry's birthday. Most of you know him by the nickname of Doc Holliday. So happy birthday, Doc, at 172 years old today. In today's briefing, we'll be covering the most recent trends that our threat intelligence team has witnessed in the trenches. My name is Keith Wojcicki, Global Head of Threat Intelligence. This week, we're joined by Senior Vice President George Glass, Vice President Mukesh Nagar, Vice President Sarah Becker, Senior Associate Ryan Hicks, all from the Cyber Threat Intel team. We'll be covering the following trends that our team is concentrating on. George is going to go over some Patch Tuesday work. Ryan's going to talk about exploitation of subservers. Mukesh is going to talk about electoral commission attack. And Sarah's going to wrap it up with reside on targeting healthcare. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to George.
Thank you very much, Keith. Yep, another month has rolled round already, and we're looking at Patch Tuesday once again. 89 vulnerabilities fixed in this one, certainly a few less than sort of what we've expected the last couple of months. 2 of those being 0-day, but yeah, there's a slight change in some of those, which I'll go into later. 23 remote code execution vulnerabilities, 18 privilege escalation, and 18 critical vulnerabilities. There's also 10 information disclosure vulnerabilities and 8 denial of service vulnerabilities, which we'll get into in just a little bit. The first 0-day exploitation I want to make you aware of isn't actually a patch. We've seen a couple of these this year. It's actually an advisory that Microsoft released about Microsoft Office and how to defend in depth. The update is some included mitigations for adversaries that are exploiting CVE 2023-36884. And this set of mitigations breaks the attack chain which affected Windows search. So that means that remote code execution could occur should a user search for a malicious file with that CVE exploited in it. There's a list of mitigations that are optionally applicable to your environment, and so anyone applying these patches should certainly read that advisory. And then we have CVE 2023-38180 with a CVSS score of 7.5, but nevertheless exploited in the wild. And this allows a threat actor to cause a denial of service attack on .NET and some Visual Studio applications. Those .NET versions are 6, 7, and ASP.NET Core 2.1. So application developers, make sure that you're updating your code bases there to stop those denial of service attacks. No further information was shared by Microsoft regarding this vulnerability yet, but as soon as we get it, we'll make sure to include that in a weekly report. And then finally, there's a few others that I'd like to draw attention to. CVE 2023-29328 and 29330, both affect Microsoft Teams. We've been covering a lot of attack vectors in Microsoft Teams recently in our reporting, and I believe that some of these vulnerabilities are addressed in this patch. Again, very limited technical information provided by Microsoft so far on these, but I imagine that those are designed to stop some of those things that we've been talking about, specifically around uploading files to SharePoint and being able to perform phishing in Teams. And then there's a raft of Exchange remote code execution vulnerabilities here. Some of them affecting just Exchange, and then some specific to Exchange Server and some specific implementations of those. So if you're running those vulnerable versions, recommend that you take a very good look at those. Just be advised that in some cases, Microsoft was seeing some degradation to service on those Exchange servers, so just be advised of that before you apply those patches. Microsoft have some workarounds in their advisories for those. And that's all for me for this week. I will pass back to Keith. Over to you, Keith.
Thanks, George. Really appreciate it. I'm going to send it to Ryan.
Thanks, Keith. So this week, Kubernetes clusters have been targeted by a crypto mining and info gathering campaign, and that's been caused by publicly accessible clusters having several misconfigurations, allowing for anonymous access to the API. of Kubernetes clusters. And Kubernetes itself is an open source software used for management and deployment of containerized applications at scale, which means it's quite a popular choice amongst development teams in a wide kind of range of organizations. It's important to note here that the campaigns are not a result of exploiting a vulnerability in Kubernetes, rather misconfigurations of the API server portion of internet-facing servers. The following misconfigurations were present in compromised systems, so those two kind of in bold in the middle of the slide there, and that allowed for access into these systems using the API. The first one being the server allowed anonymous access with high privileges, and by default, anonymous users have no permissions. However, misconfiguring this to allow for high privileges could allow for unauthorized access. Now, this could have been an accident, potentially an administrator changing the configuration for ease of access when they were sort of setting up the environment, but they forgot to lock it down after. So not necessarily something that they obviously meant to do, but again, it could have just been something they were setting up and just really forgot about afterwards. The second misconfiguration was running the that kubectl proxy command. And this command will cause the proxy on the device to listen and forward any authentication requests onwards by any host. And those permissions, the permissions that are granted to that anonymous user will be the same as the user that ran the command. So if you imagine an administrator on the server ran that command and kind of accidentally left it running, an anonymous user can go in and they will be running as the administrator with their privileges. It's worth noting that this is not particularly a widespread or issue. It's a sort of a attack surface in terms of the amount of clusters that are exposed, and that's shown on the image on the bottom there. So did a quick down search for the sort of Kubernetes API servers accessible to the internet. At the moment, it's quite low at 185. So not necessarily all of those have the misconfigurations. And the actual campaigns themselves that targeted these misconfigurations have included the deployment of XMRig Cryptominer, as well as several information gathering campaigns. And now for the information gathering, the misconfigurations in the API allowed for several commands to be available, which could prove quite useful. And the two that sort of most useful really were firstly being able to display the configurations for the whole Kubernetes cluster, and secondly, there's an API secrets command which contains configuration files and credentials linking to other applications such as Docker Hub, and also potentially storing internally managed application credentials, which could provide quite useful information for an actor to kind of pivot further into an environment. So although this particular cluster of activity is particularly small in exposure, it really highlights the kind of correct configuration for any external services, really a fundamental step in assuring adequate authorization and privilege levels. We often report on vulnerabilities acting as initial access for a threat actor. However, misconfigurations, although potentially less widespread, is likely easier to gain access for a threat actor if they can almost walk into an environment through this method. As for recommendations, these are really just surrounding those two misconfigurations in the middle. So ensuring any Kubernetes API servers, particularly internet facing, are configured to not allow anonymous authentication, and also any administrators of those environments just consider the impact of running that kubectl proxy and what that potentially would mean to the environment and allowing that anonymous access. And this kind of spreads into any kind of obviously internet connected service, just ensuring kind of configurations are set in place and secure to not allow that kind of anonymous access, not just sort of Kubernetes. And then with that, I'll hand back to Keith. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Really appreciate that. Now we're gonna turn it over to Mukesh.
Thank you, Keith. So on August 8, 2023, the Electoral Commission released a notice regarding a significant cyber attack that resulted in the compromise of personal data. The breach allowed actors to access unauthorized data to what are known as reference copies of electoral registers. These are typically used for research purposes and for verifying political donations. The incident has raised serious concerns as it potentially exposes the personal data of up to 40 million British voters, and the attack and it has ignited worries about potential threats to processes. The timeline of events released by the Electoral Commission mentions that the breach initially occurred back in August 2021 and remained undetected until October 2022, highlighting concerns about overall security measures that are currently in place. The compromised data includes electoral registers containing names and addresses of voters from 2014 to 2022, as well as those who cast overseas ballots. Additionally, the breach extends to the Commission's email systems, potentially exposing sensitive information such as banking records. The Electoral Commission has assured that the exposed information poses a relatively low risk to individuals, and worries surrounding potential impacts on processes, however, still exist. As investigations unfold, the primary focus remains on bolstering their security, resilience, and dependability of their IT systems within their organizations that hold vital roles for the electoral processes. In another unrelated incident, sensitive information was inadvertently exposed by the Police Service of Northern Ireland, underlining the ongoing challenges associated with securing data across multiple sectors. As the landscape of threat is consistently evolving, with nations exploiting vulnerabilities to achieve political and strategic aims, staying well informed and taking proactive measures to address these threats is paramount for safeguarding systems and upholding the integrity. We recommend training provided to all staff about sharing data and ensuring that all systems are kept up to date. Back to you, Keith.
Thank you very much, Mikesh. Appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. Sarah, talk about healthcare.
Thank you. So Resida has added a new sector to their target list. It is now healthcare. So Resida is a new ransomware as a service group. They've been active since about May 2023, and they have recently started to target healthcare. They're known for their double extortion attacks, where they encrypt files for ransom, and then they threaten to disclose that information of the victims who are part of that company or organization if they do not pay. So currently, Resida has around 34 victims that they have claimed. These victims are not all from healthcare. They are also from various sectors. So on August 4th, 2023, HHS Sector Cybersecurity Coordination Center, so HC3, they did release a security alert regarding Resida. So they are now urging companies to defend their networks. Within that alert, HC3 stated that this group has engaged in recent attacks against the healthcare sector. As such, it is strongly recommended that hospitals and health systems prioritize this alert, enter the malware signatures into the network defenses, and implement risk mitigation procedures as soon as possible. So researchers are stating that the healthcare industry is sometimes viewed by these threat actor groups as easier targets. This is due to the perceived vulnerability to compromise and extort these groups. And this is probably most likely going to lead to other healthcare organizations becoming a target. That is all for Resida. Thank you, Keith.
Thanks, Sarah. Really appreciate it. And a big thank you to everybody that's taken the time to tune into today's Kroll's weekly threat intelligence briefing. We hope you found this session informative. Enjoy the rest of your day and make sure to tune into next week. Take care.